So I mentioned at the start of this interview that our group's focus is to use nuclear diagnostics installed at the NIF and Omega laser facilities to do any physics that we can. And one really, really cool thing you can do with that is study nuclear reactions relevant to nuclear astrophysics. And the reason that's cool is because those reactions have been historically studied using accelerators, where you have a solid target, or sometimes even a gaseous target, but not plasma, and you have a monogenetic beam of ions impinging. That's not what we have in stars. In space, everything is in the plasma state. So being able to study those reactions in an actual plasma state, where they can be subject to plasma effects that are not mocked up at all in an accelerator, is extremely cool. So we've been, starting to bring this up as a concept for probably about 10 years now, trying to develop this platform. The really exciting things, I think, that we want to go after long term, it's not an easy problem, it's going to take several steps of development, is plasma screening. And what that means is essentially the probability for reactions to happen in space, in the plasma, are enhanced because the ions, which are positively charged, are surrounded by negatively charged electrons, which allows other ions to get closer to the initial ion without being repelled by the two positive charges, kind of like two magnets that you try to push together. So that's one problem that has never been measured. It's really a grand challenge kind of problem that we should be able to go after on the laser facilities if we have developed the right tools. So it's a diagnostic development, platform development kind of thing that's going to take a while, but worthwhile to go after. And another thing is a lot of the reactions, nuclear reactions in space, happen with nuclei that are not in their ground state, like they're naturally occurring if you just put them in a jar in a room kind of state, but they're excited either due to the high temperature or because they've been bombarded with neutrons or electrons and gained energy, so they're in an excited state. So the other thing that we really hope to go after there is how do those excited states impact the probability for reactions. And so it's actually extremely cool kind of dual use of the inertial confinement fusion facilities, that you can mock up those scenarios that are directly relevant to astrophysics to measure these cross sections. And basically you need the cross sections, which is a measure of the probability of the reactions, in order to model stellar evolution, because these reactions drive how the stars evolve. The cross sections or probabilities from accelerated measurements have been fed into these modeling codes forever, but there are significant uncertainties. What we would measure at the laser facilities would be some of the very same reactions, but it would be in a scenario that's more directly relevant to what's going on in the stars, because it would be in a plasma environment. So I would say we would definitely need to compare what we're learning from the accelerators with what we're learning from the plasma facilities in order to learn more about these plasma effects and what's actually going on in space. As I mentioned, we've been starting that work for the past decade. And one of the things we've been really interested in is studying the helium-3 reaction, which is the primary energy producing reaction in our sun. It's responsible for producing nearly half the sun's energy right now as part of the hydrogen burning proton chains. So we've filled capsules, kind of like this one, except without the whole rim around them, just the capsules, with helium-3 gas, and driven them directly with the lasers, both at the NIF and Omega, to get those helium-3 fusion reactions going, and looked at the protons emitted in those reactions, measured them with actually primarily other charged particle spectrometers, not the MRS, because the MRS efficiency isn't high enough. But as I mentioned, our group has developed a lot of different nuclear diagnostics that we can use for these kinds of experiments. But it's hard to study the helium-3 reaction exactly at solar relevant energies, because they happen at actually quite a low temperature in the sun compared to the temperatures we're used to. It's kind of hard to put in perspective, but let's say 10 times lower than easily accessible at the fusion facilities for helium-3 in particular. So we're interested in understanding how it scales with energy, and that's part of why we started looking at the T T reaction. So T is tritium. It's a heavy isotope of hydrogen. It has 2 neutrons and 1 proton in the core, which is actually very similar to helium-3, which has 2 protons and 1 neutron in the core. So they're basically the same mass. The 2 reactions are mirror reactions to each other. So by studying the neutrons that are emitted in the T2 reaction, you can understand things about the protons emitted in the helium-3 reaction without studying helium-3. So the paper that you referenced that I published in 2018, we had run a series of experiments to study the T2 reaction at omega at varying energies. So ranging from 16 to 50 keV center of mass energy. And what we saw was that the shape of the spectrum of neutrons that was emitted from that reaction actually varied with energy, which means it's likely that a similar effect is present for helium-3 as well. And that's something we actually have some data on helium-3 already. It's not been written up yet because we're still working on interpreting it using the tools in this lab here to make sure that we understand the response of the detectors that we used in those experiments.